get the audio as good as you possibly can before you hit record, because once you get into post-production, there's no magical button that will say, fix my crappy audio.
That was Bandrew Scott, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. And my goal is super simple. Uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. In today's episode, we have Bandrew Scott, who is the host of the Bandrew Says Podcast, founder of GeeksRising.com, and runs a super successful YouTube channel called Podcastage. We're going to get to that interview in just a moment, but first, I want to thank you all ahead of time for subscribing to the show on iTunes so you get notified the next time I publish an episode. And you can just do this by going to podcastninja.net/iTunes. Now, if you want to improve the audio of your podcast or become a better solo podcaster, this episode is perfect for you. Bandrew gives a ton of really important tricks and tips that you can absolutely apply to your show today in order to improve the quality of your podcast. I had a lot of fun talking with Andrew. We had a good time. So without further ado, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the show, Bandrew. How you doing, man?
Doing very well, Anthony. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to talk about mics and stuff.
Yeah, and stuff. Yeah, man, we got a couple things. I'm excited to get your take on a lot of things. But first, where you living, man? Where you coming from?
Salem, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Wow, I don't know why I was thinking New Mexico for some reason, but Salem. Were you born and raised there?
No, I was born in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, okay. All right, that's cool. So Massachusetts, my dad actually lives over there in Boston now, and okay. I've never been. But what do you do for fun over there, man?
You know, just study witches, reenact the witch burnings, that kind of stuff. All the fun stuff you do in Salem, Massachusetts.
Oh man, I mean I've never heard of it until now, but come on, there's got to be something. What do you do on the weekend? Do you go for a hike? You know, like
I really don't do much fun because I work a full-time job. I run a YouTube channel, I run a website, and then I podcast. So pretty much all my free time is taken up because the videos and podcasts that I make take a lot longer than they used to.
Yeah, that's true. So actually, wait, what do you do during the day? What is your job?
I'm not going to tell you exactly, but basically I just put numbers into Excel and then tell certain people that they don't have any more money, so they need to stop spending it. That's what I'll tell you.
It sounds like an accountant, but yeah, that sounds cool. But all right, so you're also a musician, right? You play a little music on the side, or you don't even have time to jam around a little bit?
I used to be mainly a musician. I did the whole touring thing, all that stuff. It was a lot of fun, but I kind of got out of it, and now I enjoy it, but it's more of just a for fun thing. So if I do have time or if I feel inspired, I go and pick up a guitar or a bass or a ukulele and start playing. It's just not this pressing thing like I used to have where it's I need to put out this CD, so I need to record. I need to write every single day and practice for 4 or 5 hours where it gets to the point of being a job. Now it's just I really enjoy this on occasion kind of thing.
Yeah, and like, you know, I've watched like a ton of your review videos and you always seem to jam out. I guess you get some fun during that, right? When you do like the little audio test during each yeah.
I get the creativity out there and I get to be pretty absurd at times and say some dumb things, but I have fun with that, cool. For sure.
Yeah. What you said you did some touring?
Yeah. I played in a metal band and we just did tours of the Southeast because that's where the bandmates were from. So we just did tour around the southeastern United States in California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, stuff like that.
Cool. You being like so nonchalant about it, but like not too many people like actually tour and like travel to play music. So that's pretty cool. That's definitely cool that you did that, you know?
Well, thanks.
I've never done it, but I've only played the trumpet in high school. That's about as far as my musical creativity goes. But
well, I played trumpet in high school as well. Were you a marching band kid?
Oh man. I mean, I like to think of myself as like a cooler marching band kid if that's possible, but like I was the guy that made jokes and like would like, you know, if I had a solo, I would like do it differently to try to be cooler, you know, but yeah, I was a marching band kid. Yeah.
I'm right there with you, man. That was some of the most fun I ever had. The marching band trips and band camp, and there's so many stupid jokes about band camp, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's cool, man. So how'd you get into music and recording anyway? Was it all like through band in high school, or, you know, where'd you start like picking up the guitar and jamming out through that? Yeah,
so it started in 6th grade. I moved to a new state and I didn't know anybody, and I was like, hey, trumpet, or I wanted to join band, and I thought saxophone looked really cool. But then I realized how many buttons there were, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to learn this. The trumpet has 3. I can do that. So I started on trumpet in 6th grade, and then 7th grade I did band, and I started playing the upright bass and orchestra. And from the bass, I think I just did that exclusively for a few years. And then in high school, I picked up the guitar, and it kind of translated directly because the fingerings are all the same. The bottom 4 strings are the same, so it was pretty easy to pick up, but there was still a lot of practicing that went in.
Yeah. And like if someone's thinking, oh man, I want to check out some of your songs, can someone find like your music at all anywhere, or is it kind of hidden?
The older stuff is kind of hidden, and I know some people have tracked it down, and good on them. That's some good detective work. But I do have some current stuff that's available on YouTube. I have a channel called Bandrew Plays where I just do covers, and I have a few just really dumb, original, goofy songs.
Cause I don't tell like a lot of people now that we're recording this, I used to do rapping when I was a kid. And kid, like high school. And, like my brother used to produce it, and he used to play saxophone, which is funny, but I don't talk about that anymore or anything. But if you Google like Ant-Man, you could, and like really dig a little bit, you'll be able to find some stuff. But it's so funny because when I was younger, I thought it was so cool, man. Like, oh man, it's not cool looking back and like being damn near 30 now. And I'm like, yeah, dude, it's just not cool anymore, you know? But it's funny. It's funny to look back.
I just think it's really interesting. Like everybody, when you hit a certain age and you look back on what you did when you were younger and you thought you were the coolest person and coolest thing to ever exist, and you realize what a douchebag you were. Like I look at so much stuff I did as a younger man, and I was like, wow, if I saw you today, I would kick the crap out of you. I hate you.
Oh man.
It's funny how that happens.
So you kind of left the recording music scene, we'll call it, and transformed into podcasting, right? So how'd you make that shift? What was it like? You know what? I want to make a podcast.
So just like 95% of other podcasters, I discovered the Nerdist podcast. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I had not been playing music for a couple of years at that point, and I just needed an outlet. So I just decided, hey, this seems fun. Let's go ahead and start a podcast. And I tried to make one with my friend. That fell through. Then at one point, I didn't podcast for like a year. Then I quit drinking, and I had to cut ties with a bunch of my friends because all they did was drink. And I basically needed a therapist. So I just used podcasting as a therapy session every week. So that's really what led me down there, just needing somebody to talk to.
Do you still not drink?
I do not, no.
Okay, cool, man. Yeah, I'm like 3+ years sober myself, so I feel a lot better.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing when you. The first thing I noticed was when I looked in my bank account, and I was like, "Wow, I still have some money after every single weekend. This is incredible."
Oh my God!
And then you actually have time to accomplish stuff like that. That's where I really realized how much time I was wasting, because at that point, when I started that podcast where I was using it as therapy, I started a website, and then I started the YouTube channel just a couple months later. And if I was still drinking, there's no way I would have been able to keep up with this. But now I've done that. I've launched the video portion of the podcast, and I'm still doing 2 videos a week in terms of reviews. And I think that's all because I quit drinking. So it sounds like an AA announcement here, but
yeah, right. This is a podcast, podcast, right? Anyway.
Yeah.
No, but good on you, man. That's something to be proud of. So I'm glad you brought that up.
You as well, man.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to, you kind of skipped over your first podcast because I think that's also, I like digging dirt, man, as you can see.
Okay.
And, what was your first podcast about? I thought it was like something kind of like macro global issues like Mars and like the moon landings or something. What were your first shows about? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So the first one where I started with my friend, because I was so inspired by Nerdist, I was like, oh, let's just talk about comic books. And then at the time I was drinking, so we couldn't keep a schedule because I was like, it's Friday, I want to drink. And then we try to record and it would be a disaster. And we just quit doing that after 5 episodes. And then the next podcast where I used it as therapy was titled Podcastage. So I did that for a few months before I launched the YouTube channel. And I stopped calling my podcast by that name. And because the reason I switched the podcast name is because if you type Podcastage into iTunes or any other podcatcher, you're essentially searching for the term podcast. So everybody else's podcast is going to show up. You're going to get all the super popular stuff, and mine isn't going to show up. So that was a terrible naming idea on my part. But all of that podcast is gone now. That podcast has disappeared. I did, I think, 90 episodes on that. And then I took a few months off, and I started the Bandrew Says Podcast. And the first 8 episodes of that were based on kind of big world issues. So I would talk about online bullying or gun violence or something along those lines. And I would research probably 20 to 30 hours a week in the evenings and dig up all the information I could on it. And then at the very end of the podcast, try to come up with some solution to these problems. And it was a lofty goal on my part or arrogant, actually, to think that just some stupid idiot could come up with solutions to these problems that hundreds of politicians can't come up with solutions to.
Wow. No, I thought it was kind of cool when I thought that's what you were doing at first, and I was like, wow, how'd you even want to say, you know what? Like, you kind of sound like you want to have that mentality of, I want to save the world. You know what I mean? Like, what made you do that though? Like,
well, I launched it in 2015, and the level of political discourse on social networks is just abysmal. I don't know if you're on any, but I had to stop using Facebook because I got so sick and tired of seeing everybody just posting these long diatribes saying, if you don't believe this, I hate you, unfriend me, you're the scum of the earth. And it came from both sides. And I was like, this isn't productive. It's not productive. There's no discourse going on here. So why don't I try to provide both sides and come up with a solution, and hopefully somebody can meet me in the middle and we can come to some agreement and have an actual conversation rather than just a screaming match, which is what I still think a lot of political discourse is. It's just infuriating to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when I stopped drinking, years back, and I started to exercise more, I kind of like quit my job and I tried to eat healthier. I became like more aware of all the bad things in the world. And I definitely got mad. I was definitely, I started my YouTube channel a while ago. I don't really post anymore, but you kind of almost like, they're just all rants in a way,
Mm-hmm.
And now I've kind of settled, and, you realize the world's not so bad, and you try to affect it where you can, because it's tough to tackle those global issues, man. It's hard for one person to affect it, but if you're doing your thing and, maybe if everyone does the same thing and focuses on themselves, maybe over time, I don't know, maybe that's optimistic of me to say, but
I'm a pessimist, so I do think you may be giving people too much credit.
Yeah, that's true.
I hope though.
I said in time, it could be a million years, so it's in time though.
Fair enough.
So when you started that show, the first 8 episodes, 9 episodes,
mm-hmm.
were you interviewing people? So you had a co-host, right? So you were in the same room the whole time, I assume, and then you started interviewing people in person for the first 8 episodes, 9 episodes? No,
actually, the Bandrew Says Podcast has just been me in a room by myself the entire time. So I was doing all the research by myself, which just when you all you look at for an entire week are depressing statistics, it really gets you down. So that was the main reason why I had to stop doing that, because I didn't want to get too depressed. But it was just me. I didn't ever interview anybody for that podcast.
Yeah, okay. But you did at one point, right? You one of your old shows, was it Podcastage that you had? Yeah,
during the Podcastage run, I did a couple of interviews, and I think one of the episodes is actually still up on the Podcastage channel, where I interview a cosplayer about cosplay is not consent, and she shared some stories about sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, not sexual abuse, that's the wrong word, but she talked about some issues that she's had going to conventions as a cosplayer, and it was just trying to bring light to that issue and try to share it with more people and let people know, hey, it's not okay to grope cosplayers. That's not okay. But so I think that one's still out there on the internet somewhere.
Yeah, I think it is. I didn't actually check it out, but I looked back. It's like one of your first videos. And now you don't interview people at all. You do the solo podcast, man. So
yeah,
like that. No, that I like. You laugh, but I'm thinking like, man, that sounds tough. But I think for you like it, right? You kind of like going the solo route.
I absolutely. So first off, it is tough. It's very difficult because you don't have that dynamic. You don't have that ability to bounce ideas off somebody and get them to pick up where you drop the ball or anything. Like that's the huge benefit of having a co-host. So I don't have that, but I like doing solo because it means you don't have to rely on anybody else. And doing a lot of group stuff in the past, whether it be a band or whether it be that first podcast, when you have more than one moving part, it gets difficult for schedules to align properly. And once you start relying on people, that's when you get let down. So it's an unhealthy outlook for me where I don't want to trust anybody with any part of what I'm doing. I know eventually I'll have to, but I like doing it by myself because I know I can trust myself. And when and if I do fail, I know exactly who to blame. I'm not going to have to say, well, why didn't you do this? It's going to be like, well, Bandrew, you're stupid. You didn't do it. I know exactly who to blame.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people could relate too because, with this show, and I've done other shows in the past where, you exchange like 30 emails just to book a guest sometimes. And I don't, how many do we exchange before we got, not that many actually. It was really smooth, I thought, for some reason for you.
I think it was 4. At first, you sent me an email and I thought you were asking for podcast coaching. And I was like, yeah, man, I can't do that. I don't got the time. And you're like, no, do you want to be a guest? I was like, oh yeah, sure. What time? This is when I'm available. And then the next email was like, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
So it's pretty simple. Pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean, honestly, a lot of other people are not the same. You're in the podcast space, which is why I like these type of interviews for this show, because a lot of people already know the kind of process. So it's like super smooth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, back to the solo thing real quick. I wanted to bring up the fact that, when you start the podcast, this is where I think a lot of people may go wrong or right, but like you come with this kind of, I don't want to say crazy, man, but just a lot of energy on a lot of shows. not every single show, but a lot of shows, man. I swear it's like you almost take like a B12 shot before you hit record. And I want to know, how do you come with that energy? Like, do you psych yourself out for a second? Do you like slap your face? Like, how do you start that show like that with that high energy? Because that's what you need for a solo show, right?
I think so. You hear some solo podcasts that do work with somewhat lower energy, but for me, it seems essential because a lot of people could get the same information that I'm putting out there from somebody else. So I need to provide something unique, something that would say, okay, well, I could get this from Leo Laporte, or I could get this from the Tested.com guys. I'm gonna watch this podcast or listen to this podcast because he's kind of an insane person. He has this unnecessary level of energy. I don't understand it, but hey, at least it keeps me somewhat interested, So I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's the other 23 and a half hours out of the day I'm somewhat depressed. So I have all this pent up energy, and it's an outlet for me. So I think that kind of helps me do it. And I know that I've listened to podcasts where people they sound like this. Hey, welcome to the Bandrew Says Podcast. Today we're going to talk about this. And that would just be miserable for anybody to listen to. And one of the main pieces of advice that I have for any podcaster is listen back to whatever episode you're working on and think, would I listen to this? And if you wouldn't listen to it, chances are somebody else wouldn't. So don't put it out. Fix it. Do something to resolve the problem. And in my personal situation, it was, well, I'm just talking about this. It was bring up the energy, make it interesting and exciting. So I think it's out of necessity that I bring that energy.
Yeah. And have you ever looked back at like your old videos and stuff like that?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'm glad you find a little humor in that, but go ahead.
Here's something a piece of advice that I give to a lot of people that's probably terrible, but my advice is to hate everything that you've ever made because I think that will give you the motivation to constantly try to improve and make every iteration of that project better. So I'll watch last week's video or last week's podcast and say, what the hell was that? You suck. Everything you make is garbage. Fix it. So looking back a couple of years, oh God, it is painful. It's painfully bad.
Have you always prepared for your show? Like, do you come more prepared now with like writing out topics or your format? Or actually, a weird question is, do you intentionally write jokes? Like, do you squeeze in jokes into your set? I'm curious.
No. So the way I prepare is I have an RSS reader. I don't know what it's called. I think it's Feedly. And I have like 4 or 5 different tech RSS feeds in there. So on a Sunday morning, I'll just read through about 1,000 articles, headlines, and pick the ones I want to talk about, and then read through those articles and just make an outline with bullet points. And then I do flush out my ideas. I just answered this question on my podcast last week, and the reason or the way that I approach it is my brain doesn't work that quickly, and I have a terrible memory. So if I just wrote down an article title name or anything like that, I wouldn't know exactly what I wanted to say about it. So while I'm preparing, I'll actually type out my ideas and try to flush out and develop what my thoughts are on that topic. But when I'm actually recording, I don't read from it too often. But no, I don't write jokes in there. I have had to prepare quite a bit more because that's part of my process, trying to improve on every single episode and not just be complacent with how I started off. Because if I was just making the podcast the exact same as episode 9, which is the only one that's the start of what's available, then it would just be garbage.
Yeah, I agree. It's cool that you bring different things. Even last week you had or this week technically you had a different kind of format, and I think the way you speak too, the way you break down and pause in words, I know you might not, I don't know if you've like trained to do this or you just learned over time, but some people listening are like, I don't get it, but the way you speak, or maybe I speak sometimes, is you'll pause on certain words, you'll take a breath, you'll break it up with the laughter, where I've listened to some solo podcasts and it's just kind of like monotone the whole way. You know what I mean? Where it's just like one big ramble. It actually sounds like you speak in segments. Do you do that intentionally, or?
I don't think I do that intentionally, but it may just be something that comes with listening to probably, because at my job, I listen to podcasts all day. So it could just be something that's kind of been burnt into my subconscious, the way that other solo podcasters do it, and maybe I've adopted that unintentionally. But I don't like write out, okay, we'll pause here so it sounds natural or anything. It's just how I approach it. I don't know what would cause it. I think it's just listening to too many podcasts and getting more comfortable on the microphone and understand. I think something that a lot of people who do a solo podcast don't understand is it's okay to take a break and to take a breath. That's natural. So if you just were to do a 30-minute run-on sentence, it would be completely unnatural. Sure, you'd be condensing everything into the shortest possible time, but it would be very difficult for anybody to listen to. So the way I do it is I just try to speak naturally. I just try to talk like I normally talk with just a little bit more energy.
Okay. Yeah, I guess practice over time. And I think what's even more impressive also is why I bring that up, because you don't edit. I don't know. I watch you on YouTube opposed to listen, just because I think you're more entertaining, but do you edit your show at all?
So for the
I don't mean that in a bad way. Like,
No,
you know what I mean?
no.
I'm not saying it needs to be edited. Okay.
No,
Go ahead.
I understand that completely. And I was just listening to an episode of Better Podcasting, and they were talking about editing. That's why I was laughing, because they went on this whole diatribe about that. But for me personally, I try not to edit, because for podcasts, and if it's oh gosh, I'm trying to formulate my ideas here. So if it's a video podcast, I think it's really unnatural to have hundreds of cuts in a video, which is what my audio file would look like if I was doing it 2 years ago. So when I first started doing the video, I was doing a lot of editing and a lot of cuts and saying, well, you didn't say that perfectly. Start over. And I would start over some podcasts like 30 times. And it would take me an entire 12 or 13 hour day to get a 25-minute podcast. So at that point, I said, well, what the hell are you doing with your time? You could spend this better. Podcasts are meant to be a natural conversation. That's what's appealing to about them. That's why you enjoy listening to them. So why are you trying to make them this perfect sculpture of information? Just make it natural. It's okay if you stumble over your words. It's okay if you screw up. Just do it over. I think the only time that I do really cut or do any editing is if I have to switch a camera or anything like that, or if I do really screw up a segment and say something stupid and like, okay, well, let's just cut that out. And that's why I really like having two separate angles. I have two cameras when I podcast, because I can switch between them like every 10 or 15 seconds. And then if I do have to edit, I can just switch to the other camera angle, and it doesn't look like I've done an actual edit. It just looks like the natural transition between the cameras that occurs throughout the rest of the podcast. It's just a little trick.
Oh, I was just thinking that's actually really smart. Do you actually switch the cameras live, or you only do that in post?
That's only in post. I don't have, first off, I don't know any way to hook up my DSLR to my computer. I think I would need some kind of interface for that, but I don't have that. So I just record the video onto the DSLR, and then I record to a GoPro. I think it's like 4 or 5 years old. And then I just import those and then just manually cut and drag every single transition. It's a nightmare. It takes like 2 hours, but I do it manually. Okay. All right.
And you record with which microphone?
I use the SM7B, and then I run that into, currently my setup is this, the SM7B into the Cloudlifter CL1, into the DBX 286S, and currently I'm testing out the Xenix 1202 USB, so that's what I typically run into, but for this interview, I'm using the Zoom U44, and then that records into Logic Pro.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. All right. That's a good setup, man. That's a pretty good setup. You sound incredible.
Well,
that's why I ask. Also, you know, do you remember the first microphone you've ever used?
I don't know what it was called, but the first microphone that I ever used, actually, the first one just came with I think it was some Logitech desktop microphone. It was just this gray pile of crap. It came with some desktop I got back in the early 90s, but the first actual microphone was just an SM58 ripoff from, what was it, Radio Shack. I just went down there and picked up a microphone and some kind of mixer. And I preach about this on the Podcastage channel. Don't plug your microphone or your mixer directly into your motherboard's 3.5 millimeter input. Well, that's how I started recording. I ran the microphone into a mixer into my computer's mic input, and it was garbage. But it was exciting because I was in high school, and you know, it was a way to record our band. It was just out of necessity that we did it.
Yeah. Do you still have that rip-off microphone or no?
No, I don't think I do. It might be at my mother's house, actually. I don't know.
Really? You actually think you still have it? Wow. That's
I might.
Incredible, man. Well, I know you have like 1,000 microphones, right?
I have not 1,000. I have too many. I know that much. There's too many. I don't know how many there are. I don't know where the majority of them are. It's just, I wish I didn't set this precedent where I would compare microphones and keep them, because now when a company says, hey, do you want to review this? And they would just send me a loaner unit. I'm like, I would, but I really can't do that because I'm going to get asked additional questions, and I'm going to get asked to compare it to this microphone and this microphone, so I really need to have it here. And for some of the higher end pieces of gear that I have reviewed and plan on reviewing, I can't just they can't just send it out because it wasn't cheap for them to manufacture. So I have to end up buying these things directly from companies. But there's too many mics here, man. There's too many.
Give me a guess, man. Come, the people want to know. Everyone wants to know.
I would
50?
No, it's upwards of 150 probably. There's probably close to 200 mics in here.
Can you take a picture of it for the show notes?
Yeah,
you have it on the back of the desk, right? In the background?
Yeah, I have. That's maybe a third of them.
Wow.
But yeah, I'll take a picture of that and send it over to you.
Cool, man. I actually just like 2 weeks ago, maybe a week ago, I voted. I wanted to hear the Audio Technica BPH S1, which is like a headset, which I know you don't really do like ever, unless it's actually I don't. Yeah, maybe the older videos I've seen you do some of those headset ones, but I'm really curious of your thoughts on that.
That headset has been sitting in my Amazon cart for probably a year and a half. I am so interested in reviewing it.
But no one's voting.
Yeah, nobody's voting for that one.
Oh
it seems so interesting to me.
I've heard a lot of great things. I mean, I think I'm going to start just like hopping on different VPNs and creating different accounts and start voting for. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
It's okay. Some other people have done that, and then I've just screamed at them in the comments.
Dude, no, I want it to be organic. Like it has to be what everyone else wants, you know. So
well, it's been sitting in there so long, and I am so interested. I may just end up buying it in one of the upcoming months. Like I have my cart set up for the next reviews I'm doing, and I've thrown in a few mics that people haven't requested or even voted for or anything, and I'm just so interested in them that I'm just gonna buy them.
I was gonna say, it almost sounds like an addiction, man. You just ready to try out the new mic. You want to test it out. It's crazy. Because I've never met anyone that has so many mics and tests so many mics like this and actually give legit reviews. Like your testing on each mic is smart. It's a good flow, you know, to give a good feel of everything.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. It's taken me like a year and a half to get there, but I think you're absolutely right about it being an addiction. And there's that saying, like, you give up one addiction for another. And this is that addiction that I gave up drinking for. It's just so I could buy way too many microphones and still have no money.
Wow. And still have no money. That's the punchline.
Yeah.
Now, actually, you know, you reviewed like a ton of mics, but you recently just put out the Shure SM58, right? Which is a solid mic, $100. I guess that's your go-to mic, recommended around that $100 range, right? Because you don't need, I mean, you have an incredible mic. You know, you record with the same mic that Michael Jackson recorded Thriller on, which some people say that might be a little overkill, but, you know, the truth is you don't need the best mic, right? To get a great sounding audio. Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of people will look at live podcasts or video podcasts and see the SM7B or the RE20 or the Heil PR40 and think, that's what I need. I need that $400 microphone to sound good. That's not true at all. You can buy a $40 microphone and sound pretty dang amazing, like the Knox Dynamic USB microphone or something. That's $40. And it's a USB microphone as well as an XLR microphone, so there's room to grow. And you can plug that directly into your computer and sound pretty dang close to what I am getting right now. And the majority of people who listen to your podcast wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So it's really, when you get to the level of microphone like the SM7B or these super high-priced dynamic mics, it's really just for yourself because the majority of people won't notice.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people and heard a lot of, you know, different podcasts, obviously. And, you know, the Knox is, I guess, like, you know, ATR 2100, which is a super popular one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think a lot of people could start with that and go from there, right? I think you said one time, like, dude, just make sure you're going to do this for the rest of your life and enjoy it. Then you can invest, you know, $400 or $500 or $1,000 if you want to go all out and overkill. But can you give a couple tips, you know, to kind of start us off? Maybe we could break down a few. I don't know, maybe starting with like I don't know, wherever you want to take it, man. Maybe, because if you record with like a $50 or $100 mic, it can still sound bad. Maybe if you're holding it wrong or depending on where you are,
Okay.
But can you break down a couple ways that people could kind of listen and say, you know what? Yeah, I could try that tip. That's a cool tip.
Okay. So the first thing I would recommend is get the audio as good as you possibly can before you hit record. That's the first thing I would say to anybody who's recording a podcast, recording a YouTube video. I don't care what it is. Get the audio as good as you possibly can before you hit record, because once you get into post-production, there's no magical button that will say, fix my crappy audio. You're shining up a turd at that point. So get the audio as good as you can before you hit record. But let's take a step back. So a lot of podcasts that I've heard, people will be really far back from the microphone. So for example, if I'm back here, I have a $350 or $400 microphone, but it sounds like crap. So I would say get close to the microphone so it picks up mainly your voice. That's the first thing I would say. Then I would say turn off all the excess noise in the background. I get so many questions saying, well, what can I do to remove the noise from my fan? I just say turn off the fan. That's an easy solution. Then you don't have to spend $500 buying some kind of Waves plugin that can do magic to your audio. Just turn off the damn fan.
I was gonna say, and I've had audio come to me, and I've tried to produce some audio that's just like running like 30 plugins or a dozen plugins on one, or filters on one, it just doesn't come out good. The more plugins I run or the more filters I put on, it just sounds worse, I feel.
That's absolutely right, because you may think that running this software, this little plugin that takes out background noise, is only taking out the background noise, but it's also taking out certain frequencies from your voice. And as you add dozens and dozens of plugins to try to fix your crappy audio, your voice just becomes unnatural sounding and it sounds bad. So that's why I say try to get it as good as you possibly can before you hit record. Now, another big issue that I hear in a lot of podcasts is tons of reverb in the room. So if you're in a room that just has a cement floor and brick walls and there's nothing in there, it's going to sound awful. It's going to sound like you're in a reverb chamber. So a lot of people would think, well, then I have to go out and spend a couple $100 on audio foam or audio treatment for my room. That's not the case. If you're not doing a video podcast, a really cheap trick is just go record in your closet. Seriously, you may think it sounds stupid, but if you record in your closet where there's all those clothes and maybe the floor of your closet is carpeted, it will sound so much better than recording in a 10-foot by 10-foot room that has no cloth or no bed or no couch or no carpet. It's going to sound so much better. And you may look stupid, but hey, it's a podcast. Nobody's going to see you.
That's true. What? Quick question. I have a lot of people that ask me about, and even I'm recording, I don't know if you could tell, but I'm recording in an office, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like super tight, all wood floors, glass. What do you recommend people do in an office?
Oh, that's difficult.
That's a tough one, right?
That really is. I mean, if it's an office, it wouldn't be a viable option to go out and buy a bunch of audio treatment and throw it on the walls. You could just get like a comforter or something and maybe drape it over your head in the microphone. That's a possibility. You'll look stupid. But like I said, if it's just an audio podcast, who cares?
So it's funny you say that because that's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm in a shared office with like 100 other people, and they go to look into the room and they just see me with like a blanket over my head. But honestly, man, it makes a huge difference. And you crank the AC before you turn it off, and it's not so bad. But okay, go ahead, continue.
So on a similar note, I see a lot of people asking about those. I don't know if you've seen them, those audio shields where it's just a metal backing and then it has some audio treatment on the inside. And I saw a test by Booth Junkie, that's the YouTube channel, and he did a test of that to see if it actually does anything. And it turns out it does absolutely nothing because the reverb that's going into your microphone is coming from the front of the microphone, the end that you're speaking into. And you're not putting any audio treatment there. So it's still picking up all your voice that's bouncing around the room. It does literally zero to the audio, so don't waste your money on those.
What I think is, as far as for me, like when I travel, like I couldn't even carry that if I wanted to. That's why I use the blanket often, or I go under my bed sheets or in the closet, because I mean, how can I carry that with me when I travel around? It's like super tough. And I'm really glad you told me about that. I actually follow Booth Junkie on YouTube, and I didn't check out that one, but I saw his one on pop filters, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that to see if I think those might be helpful. Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the best practices to eliminate pops, because no matter how good of a pop filter you have, you're still going to have pops, would just be not to speak directly into the actual microphone. Like, for instance, right now I have the microphone pointed at my mouth at like a 30-degree angle. I'm not speaking directly into it. I'm kind of speaking over it. So I think I really haven't done many tests on different types and styles of pop filters or windscreens, so I don't know which one is better. But as you said, Booth Junkie did one on there, and I think I added the pop filter that he recommended to my Amazon shopping cart, actually. But
what was it, the metal one?
The Stedman, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have that one in my cart, so I'm going to eventually test that out. But I think what's most important is going to be your microphone technique. So you're not talking directly into the diaphragm. So the wind coming out of your mouth isn't going to directly hit the diaphragm of the microphone and cause that plosive. So I think that's more important. Obviously, a pop filter is, I would say, essential if you're recording a podcast, but it's equally as important to know how to place the microphone to get the best sound without sending the air directly into the mic. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I also bring it up because on your podcast, you obviously, you have a great mic, you have a good pop filter. But when you do your videos and you review mics, which I like that you don't put a pop filter on the test, because you want to hear how it is raw, unedited. But yeah, you don't use them on any of your tests, your mic test videos. So that's why I was like also curious. I was like, well, it sounds pretty good. You barely hear a pop. So I'm glad that we're talking about this, because these little things make a big difference, Yeah.
So the reason I will use a pop filter on my reviews, but only if the microphone comes with it, because my approach to it is I want you to know exactly how the audio is going to sound if you just buy this microphone kit. And if I was using a $50 pop filter and people thought, oh, well, I'll get good enough audio without that, and they'll just buy the microphone and then realize I'm getting all these pops, what's that about? They would come and scream at me. So by only testing what comes in each microphone package, I think it gives a much fairer review, and it gives people an idea of exactly the audio they're going to get if they buy it.
I agree, man. And you do USB into the computer, then you do like a, audio interface, because I've seen so many people review and they put the pop filter, they have like a couple $100 preamp or mixer, and then I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I want to know how it sounds without all that stuff. Not everyone has, all that extra gear to kind of boost it up, So
exactly. It's painful sometimes to be to put out the audio in the level it's at, but I just record stuff directly into directly into QuickTime. I don't even record it into Logic Pro because I don't want it to get any sort of encoding benefit from Logic. So I just record the audio directly into QuickTime to avoid any benefits there either. But wow. I've definitely seen that as well, where people will be testing out a $50 microphone, but they'll run it through a $200 microphone processor and then into an Apogee Duet, which is like a $900 interface. It's like, that's not how the microphone would sound in a realistic scenario.
Yeah, that's true. What about any tips on reducing the S sounds, the S'ers, or that's pretty much just mic technique also? I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about de-essing your audio. I have a de-esser on my mic processor that I keep off. Okay. I don't know what kind of, maybe a speech coach? Wow.
I don't know, because isn't that something that an issue that some people have but others don't?
I guess even when I say I guess, it depends. If you elongate that S at the end, then it might hit. But I mean, that's like a rarity, but I've heard people, mention that to me. And, I've asked a couple of my, friends, and they're like, oh, get the de-esser, plugin. And, but then I started looking at mic techniques and I was like, I don't know. I think you could avoid it a bit by, again, not talking directly into it or, pronunciating a bit better. But yeah, I realized that I don't know if it's, cause sometimes I'm thinking, being portable, how worth it is it to get something that is going to automatically reduce that for me, in a preamp or something or a mixer. I don't know. I just getting your ideas on it. So, all right, then if it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I may be the wrong person to ask because after playing in bands for so long, probably the higher frequencies of my hearing are gone. So maybe that's why it doesn't bother me. Maybe I just have S's in every single one of my videos and all my podcasts. I just don't know it.
Yeah. It's all good. No. I asked you because a lot of people are like, dude, I don't care about any of this. I just want to know what this guy records with, right? And I want to know all his tips because it sounds incredible, right? His bottom line, that's why you show off your podcast studio setup and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because people are like, well, what are you using,
Yeah.
So it's all good. Overall, I just want to wrap it up. I don't know if you have any other tips you want to add to the end. I think we went through a lot, but
yeah,
if you want to close it off with anything else, go ahead.
Let me go ahead and back up. So I was just thinking about this. This is a trick I learned I don't know how long ago, but talking about pop filters, if you don't have money to spend on a pop filter or you want to start recording and you don't have one, literally place a pencil right up to your lips and in between yourself and the microphone, and the pencil will disperse the air to go around go away from the microphone. So that's a really simple way to avoid pops into your microphone. Just place a pencil or maybe even your finger directly in front of your lips.
Wow.
So there's just a fun free tip.
That little DIY, DIY tip. I'm going to see it on Facebook now, trending soon. That'd be cool. That's cool, man. All right, man. Cool. Thanks a lot, actually. I think this is really good. A lot of good, solid information. I'm happy to kind of find out a little bit more about your backstory and things like that. And if people want to reach out, check out your videos, listen to your show, how can people reach out to you and find some more info?
Yeah, they could watch my mic reviews if you're in the market, or there's audio interfaces, there's gaming headsets there. It's youtube.com/podcastage. My video podcast is on youtube.com/Geeks Rising, and it is called the Bandrew Says Podcast, so you can search that in your podcatcher or anything like that. And if you want to talk to me, just shoot me a note on Twitter. That's the only social media that I'm really active on, and that's at Bandrew Says.
Oh, actually, you know what? I never thought about asking about Geeks Rising. Can you quick, punch talk about what that's all about?
Yeah, so initially that was the idea behind it is I see all these geek and nerd sites out there that just talk about pop culture. The way I wanted to approach it was, let's try to actually give geeks and nerds the tools to actually succeed in their fields. I have a plan to launch a podcast, a flagship podcast for the site, but I just haven't had the time and the resources to do that yet. So eventually I will be doing that, and it will be focused on that, interviewing different experts in fields and talk about how they got to the point they're at, what steps they went through, their backstory, and kind of help geeks who are interested in space or interested in podcasting or interested in comics, how to go from 0 to 100.
Okay, and you have two other shows on there too, right?
Yeah, one is kind of fallen by the wayside for the time being. The host didn't really have time to continue it, so right now it's just the Bandrew Says Podcast and the Paper Robots Podcast. I do have another a conspiracy paranormal podcast that's going to be coming out the next few months as well. So if you're interested in that, geeksrising.com.
Okay, cool, man. We got the sneak peek. All right. All right, Bandrew, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you for listening to the third episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out Bandrew's show, his podcasting gear, or even take a look at his collection of microphones, go to podcastninja.net/3. And I'm going to talk to you in the next episode. Peace.
Podcast Ninja.